These are the top 30 fantasy books of all time, according to me. A couple weeks ago, I made a video about the top 30 series according to Forbes. That list was a total disaster, and I had a few people ask me what my list would be. So this is my top 30 specific to fantasy books. I'm a little bit terrified to make this because I feel like no matter what books I put where, I'm going to upset somebody. Please keep in mind, I have not read every fantasy series there is, as much as I would like that to be the case. So you might think of series that you think deserve to be on here that aren't, and that's probably because I haven't read them, or because they're terrible. We'll also only be including series where I have read at least 2 books in that series. Disclaimers aside, let's jump into my numbers 30 through 21. Let's just start things off controversially with the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks. Hear me out. The first 3 books in this series were really cool, and the last 2 books were pretty bad. That being said, some of the things in this series have definitely stuck with me enough that it ekes in at the very end of this list. At number 29, we have Dragonlance by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. These are just a feel-good fantasy series, classic, high fantasy. If you love D&D, this is a great series to pick up. You got your dwarves, your elves, your rangers, you have dragons, you're going on quests. I loved these growing up. In a similar vein, at number 28, we have the Shannara series by Terry Brooks. These are also high fantasy that are very classical, little derivative, like, is the first book kind of like Lord of the Rings? Yes. Are these a lot of fun still? Also, yes, I loved these growing up. Number 27, we have The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne. I've read the first 2 books and I liked them a lot. I don't feel like I liked them quite as much as some people have, but I think by the time I finish this series, it might bump up a little bit higher. It uses a lot of classic fantasy like archetypes and tropes while having a much more modern like writing style. And these are a lot of fun. I think they're Celtic inspired. You should check them out. Number 26, we have The Books of Babel by Josiah Bancroft. This is about a man and his wife who go to a fantasy version of the Tower of Babel, which is huge, and every single layer of the tower is like its own city. And when they get there, he loses track of his wife and he has to try and find her. I like this so much because Josiah Bancroft has such a vivid and weird imagination. Every layer of the tower has weird politics and all sorts of crazy things and challenges and dangers. His writing style is poetic, yet has this dry, sardonic sense of humor that I think works really well. These books are funny. I have some pacing issues and some other like weird things in them that bring them down a little bit, but they're really fun. Number 25, I have The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. It's hard to make a top 30 fantasy series without including this somewhere. These books meant so much to me as a kid, and even though these aren't like my favorite fantasy series of all time, they still hold a special place in my heart. Number 24, I have The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini. These books meant so much to me as a teenager. And if Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and Narnia really got me into fantasy as a kid, these kept my love of fantasy alive as I went through middle school. Are they a bit derivative? Yeah. They're pulling together the plot of Star Wars, the magic system from Earthsea, Dragon Riders similar to Dragon Riders of Pern, you have world elements that are from Lord of the Rings, but it's such a fun mashup, and I reread these recently as an adult and I still had a good time with them, so I think they're worth being on the list. At number 23, we have the Rhyria Revelations by Michael J. Sullivan. This is another kind of classic high fantasy feeling story. And what really makes this stand out is the 2 lead characters, Royce and Hadrian, have such an interesting dynamic and relationship, and the world elements become really interesting as the mysteries unfold throughout the series and tie into the personal backgrounds of our 2 lead characters. Number 22, I have the Founders Trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett. He's quickly becoming one of my favorite fantasy authors. He has such creativity in his books. He writes really funny dialogue, he has great characters, and his magic system in this is so cool. It's basically rewriting reality with a form of magical coding. You should check this out. And at number 21, I have the Rook and Rose Trilogy by M.A. Carrick. This is another series that has a super interesting and creative world. It's sort of a fantasy-inspired Venice. There's a lot of politics, there's a lot of crime lords. It has kind of a Robin Hood element to it with like vigilante characters, and that's super fun. Multiple magic systems, and several really endearing characters that we follow. This is a really fun trilogy, and while the 3rd book isn't quite as good as the first 2, it's still a very worthwhile trilogy. I'd love to hear your thoughts on my 30 to 21 pick, and I'll be releasing 2 more videos very soon with my remaining top 20 fantasy series of all time.